Yeah, as you said, my job is go to the outside world and give them our technology and also look at everybody else what they're doing. Like look at all the other APIs that are out there, look at all the other documentation out there. And I have to start with a disclaimer that in this presentation I will complain about some of the examples that are live on websites. And IBJS Lint, I might hurt somebody's feelings, but I already talked to the people that I'm showing this stuff with. And I don't do this because I want to show off that we do bad things, but I want it to encourage us to do better. I mean, when you go outside to the world, people always come like, Yahoo has great documentation. We've got a massive amount of documentation, and people like it, and people find our things, and they can use our things. However, our team is good, but I want us to be excellent. We're one of the oldest companies on the web. We built the web more or less with our link directory. So we should actually be out there as a shining light for other people how they should be doing things. I'm the kind of guy that went and saw Avatar, and I was terribly annoyed that the story was Pocahontas. I didn't look at the 3D stuff because I saw every new character coming in, and I was annoyed that it was predictable what's going to happen to that guy or that woman or that whatever animal it was. And that's the same thing that I want here. I mean, if I want to release something, we should be out there as a shining light and saying like, wow, this is how Yahoo does it. We want to do that as well. And we do that with a lot of products. I mean, the YUI documentation, for example, and the documentation system we use for YUI, we released that one, and other people release that now as well and use it for themselves, and we should do that more. I also realize that it's easy to judge decisions with the benefit of hindsight. And that's always a big problem. We always like to, when we show something, well, why did you do it this way? It's so much better because I did it 8 years ago, and this is how we did it back then. So it's a matter of like, you can always, it's easy to complain about things when you later on find out that was wrong. But we also should be faster. We should be faster in updating things, we should be faster in changing things, because the market out there changes all the time. So complacency to me is the enemy of innovation and communication. A lot of people are complacent as soon as they got something out there on the web and say like, well, that's good enough. If people want to find it, they just go through the documentation and they find it somewhere. It is in the documentation. It's on page 52 under the picture of the cheetah. It doesn't have anything to do with that chapter, but it is in there. You can find it. And this just doesn't work for me. So writing great technology is a thing that good developers do. And we have great people here that write good technology, and every other company has good people writing technology as well. The problem is that explaining the technology to others and making it understandable and maintainable is a totally different thing. So whenever people think like, oh, the developer should write the documentation, that's probably a bad idea, because developers have a few barriers when it comes to communicating their own content to other people. And that makes developers a bad advocate for technology. A lot of companies do that. They have like he's our main guy for Android. He's our main guy for Flash. He's our main guy for Microsoft products. Here's our main guy for Corel products when they still existed. He's our advocate as well, because he knows everything about it. And that's the problem. If you know everything about a certain subject, you're actually not good in explaining it because you don't expect it to be explained to you. So what holds developers back is like, first of all, we know the subject matter. It's like you go to somebody and you go to a backend guy, talk about PHP security. He's like, well, that is obvious. Everybody knows that. Front-end guys, that is obvious. Everybody knows that. So we don't need to explain it. Whereas in documentation, you should explain things that come up. So most of the documentation that we write from a technology standpoint rather than from a usability standpoint. How do I use this technology in real life, and where do I get stuck? This is the things documentation should answer. The other problem that developers have is that we're not known for our patience. So if we explain something to somebody and he still doesn't understand it, we do it twice, a second time, then he still doesn't understand it, and we're like, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't use computers. Or like, everybody knows PHP. Come on, I know you're a Java guy, but you should know this about PHP as well. And it's just not the way we do things. But it's amazing how fast developers lose patience. My favorite was, I was at the Young Rewired State in London. That was basically government data, and they invited hackers in that were 14 to 18 years old. And it was great because I used to do like youth work as well back home, and then I did the IT stuff, and now that came together again. And it was interesting. Every time those 15, 16-year-old hackers stumbled on some technology problem, they discarded the whole product and basically said, like, let's start another project then. And you're like, no, wait, you just didn't read an RSS feed. That's really easy if you do it this way, so you don't have to discard the whole project. But we do that quickly, like, okay, that doesn't work. The amount of developers that go to documentation and APIs, and when it doesn't do the one thing they want to have, yeah, okay, I'm going to Google and find another one. And that's the problem. We have to find that one problem that people want to solve without documentation. The other thing that developers have is that we have to go through a lot of pain and see this as a useful learning experience for everybody. So I learned the hard way that it's a bad thing to write insecure PHP. It's a good thing if a new developer learns the same problem again. That's why we're running in circles as developers. We always solve the same problems, or we make people run into the same problem so they learn from their own mistakes. And yeah, if they put them in a live system, it's our mistake as well, not only that person's mistake. So the whole thing, like, it was hard for me, it should be hard for everybody else, doesn't work for me anymore. And I mean, this is like 12 years, 14 years of web development now. We shouldn't have to make the same mistakes again. And this is also obvious. Good code explains itself is my favorite example. Good code explains itself is the biggest myth out there, because the good code that you've written is, of course, obvious to you. Another developer has a different style and doesn't understand where you were coming from, what that shortcut notation is, what that special trick is. And a good code explains itself is just you're lazy. You just don't want to explain things to people. And good code explains itself also 5 years later is not good code anymore, and it tells a completely different story. Whereas if you document it, you force yourself to actually think about your code as well. I found, for example, when I wrote my books, I became a much better developer because I had to explain people what I did in every line of my code. And most of the time I rewrote the code examples that I had written while I was writing the chapter. Because I found, like, okay, I can make this easier to understand, I can make this shorter, I can make this better. And this is what we don't do much. We just like, code, it works out there, documentation done. On the other hand, sales and marketing people are bad tech advocates as well, because they always come from the other side of the equation, which is like, oh, everything is great here, like nothing to see that goes wrong. So we have the brand and product comes first. So whenever you see tech advocacy, and yeah, I mean, we're good at that, but other companies I've seen are just like, yeah, we have a product for that. And you're like, yeah, and it's like 5 generations behind your competition. So why don't you just tell people what they're doing? I was at an Open Hack Day, and the BBC in London released their archive of the last 40 years of audio, video, transcriptions, and texts for us to play with for 24 hours. And I'm like, for me as a data junkie, this was a sweet shop. And I was like, this is so cool. So there was one big corporation that didn't build this computer, but other computers. And they were asked if they had a live streaming server, because somebody wanted to do something with live streaming of the video systems. And they're like, yeah, here's a DVD that you can install. It's a half-hour test version, and then you can actually start streaming your video. And I'm like, this guy has 24 hours to build a cool hack. He really does not want to install DVDs and wait for them to end. So here's an open source Red 5 streaming server. Use that one instead. So don't come from your products all the time. Give what people what they can do, and then say, our product does this and this extra. So solve people's problems, then bring the foot in the door with the brand. But most of the time we try to like, hey, use our products. And we have this internally as well in mailing lists. If you use something else but our products, people come down on you like a ton of bricks. If you ask them, can we improve this product? No, we don't have enough manpower for that. So do the right thing there. So there's a good and positive story in everything is another thing that I always, when I work with marketing and PR, it's like, yeah, we find a spin about this. Like, oh, two people used our product. That means last week it was one person. That's 100% more users this week, right? And that's the kind of information that developers can actually look through and like, okay. We had this in one company as well where it said like our competitor has only half the users that we have. The problem was that the competitor product was 8 years younger than our product, which means next year or the year after they will have overtaken us. So when you throw around numbers, think about that engineers can actually look through math and basically see when you're trying to bamboozle them. It's about the fun, connecting to other people and doing like cool tech stuff and like other stuff. This is always the fluffy thing about it. We always have like shiny, happy people on posters next to our technology. I love these like CDs with like handshaking and all ethnic groups in one photo. These are like the best things from the 80s, and we should forget about these right now. If it's a tech product and it does not deal to mom and dad users, we don't have to brush it up to make it interesting for mom and dad users. We should think about the market that we want to reach and people that should use this product. And there is no competition is another big thing that I always get from marketing people. Like, yeah, hey, we have a new map product. What do you mean Google has a map product? No, they don't. And you're like, well, everybody else has a product. It's like IT. Everybody does the same things. There's not much new invention going on. It's just a matter of like how much dedication does a product get in one company, how much money does it get in another company, And this is how it works out. I mean, there's never mobile providers this year that will bring out map products that nobody expected them to. And it's going to be a really interesting market. So good tech for advocacy is a mashup. It's a different, it means like you have to have the technical knowledge, but you have to have the good writing. You have to make people excited about products, but you don't make them excited because it's a shiny thing, but you make them excited because it solves a problem for them. So you have to weave in and out between tech geek and normal people and like designers and whatever. The amount of times when I go to different conferences, I give the same topic talk at different conferences and I write them completely different. Because if an audience of designers listens to me about YQL, they want to have something different than an audience of Java developers. But we try to make that for everybody, and that's a problem. So to succeed in giving tech to the world, you have to change your approach. So we have to go from, ooh, use this, it rocks, it's the best thing ever, to actually, here's a problem and this is a solution. It doesn't matter what our technology is, it doesn't matter what we try to sell to the world. If we don't solve a problem with our solution, then why should we even bother? It's people have issues, people have things to solve, people have a website to build, they got 24 hours to do it, or their website doesn't work in browsers, they want to make sure it works in the next browser, they have to find a solution. And we just don't tell them like, use YUI for everything, here's a slider control, or you say like, here's YUI CSS grids that works in every browser, in 24 hours you can redesign your website. I was in Atlanta at the Webmaster Jam session last year, or year before, and it's a great conference because people from the audience shout out URLs, and designers on a panel basically bring up the URL and show the website and say what can be done better and what is good about it and so on and so forth. It's totally open as well. People from the audience can come up and say like, that's actually bullshit what you just said, and it's actually this way. It's a wonderful little conference. And there was a lady from NASA there. And she brought up a website that is in part of their HR network, and it's like hiring people or NASA for Good or whatever it was. And it was a website that was table-based, like 5 levels deep, really old school, bad HTML. And it was built last week, and we were all sitting there like, really? and I'm like, but wait, let the woman explain, why? And she's like, well, we have a content management system that was built in 1997, and that's basically what we're using, and we can roll out a website with this content management system in 2 weeks, but we don't have any developers. We don't have any designers. Everybody told us there's no way to do that in any other way but with this content management system. So the other thing about the Web Jam is that during lunch it's open stage. So anybody can go up and it's 2-hour lunch and for 15 minutes give a talk. So in the 15 minutes I went up there, I downloaded her site onto my machine, used YUI grids to redesign the site in 15 minutes, zipped up the code and emailed it to her on stage. And out of a sudden people are like, wow, this is what YUI does. I could have gone up there and say like, oh, YUI is like great, we use it and blah, and here's the library thing. But with one example, with solving one problem, that everybody thought like, oh my God, that woman, I wouldn't want to work there ever. But if you show basically, you can redesign the thing in 10 minutes if you just use out-of-the-box systems, and out of a sudden people were like, okay, we're going to use YUI, this is interesting. So solve the problem, not try to sell the YUI or any other product. So the main thing to answer to any end user and developer out there is, what is in it for me? Why should I bother going to your website, reading through your documentation and using this system? How does it make my life as a developer easier? And that's a big problem because developers always think everything else is not as good as their own solutions. We are happy to reinvent the wheel and look at something because we think we're better than most other developers, or we find this one extra tick to the solution that nobody else thought of, which most of the time we don't, but it's just ingrained in us. But so if we disarm this from the beginning and say like, here is what it does, here's where it's running on a live site, here's what it does for a company like Yahoo, and it can do something for you as well, then people get excited. So developers are busy people and don't have time to read long documents. So if you send them to documentation websites and say like, okay, just read through the whole documentation, they're not going to do that. They're going to use Google or a search engine and enter it and find this part of our documentation and only concentrate on this part. If we explained a lot of good things in like 5 paragraphs above it, that's not going to happen. People are not going to go there and read it. They're going to read there when they go into the detail about it, but not when they want to find out the first thing about a certain product. I was when another big company came up with a search engine and they actually put their documentation out. I was like, cool, new API, played with it, went on Twitter and said like, this documentation is terrible because it's like frames and reloads every time and it takes ages for me to find anything. And the head of API followed me on Twitter, which I didn't know, and tweeted me back and said like, well, you can download the SDK as well. And it's a web service. It's a web service. I don't want to download an SDK and install something on my machine to actually use as web service that I should just point to on the web. This is what the web is about. And also the installer was an MSI installer for documentation, and I'm using a Mac or Ubuntu, so it didn't make any sense at all whatsoever for me. But it's once again, come from your product and help people with your product, rather than like make it a PDF, make it an HTML document so anybody can read it. So detailed documentation is needed, but it's only used when things already went wrong. This is one of the biggest frustrations of our documentation team. They write these great documentation, but people only go there when they've found a bug, when they found a problem. And then they're already in complaint mode. They're not in like praise mode. They're already like, your product didn't work. I didn't find that documentation, or I didn't know how to do it. And then I had to hunt through your documentation as well. Not thanking them, at least we have the documentation there, which not many people do. But just like, okay, this didn't work. I have to, and your documentation is too complicated as well. So feedback you get of documentation is always a bit tainted. Especially nowadays. I mean, like 6, 7 years ago, people were happy to comment on things. People were happy to send you an email. People donated money for your products and these kind of things. Nowadays, with Twitter, with Facebook, we're so busy on the web already that we don't have time to thank you for anything, but we're happy to complain. So always take feedback from developers with a grain of salt, sometimes with a bag of salt. So in order to get people to care and get them to play with what you offer, we need a simple way in. That's the foot in the door. Like, not ask me to download an SDK and install it to use your web service. Said, give me a demo URL where I can click the thing and I can see what's going on. And here are a few examples about this. When our new search engine came out, when Boss came out, one of the features that we talked about in Paris, when the Boss team was in Paris, was like, today we actually have a new feature which is called keywords. We have keywords that Yahoo indexed for these different websites. That's now part of the RSS output, and you can see that content there. So I'm like, keywords, search engine optimization people. They love keywords. I mean, Google officially said they don't support the keywords meta tag anymore, but it doesn't matter. People still love keywords and want to put them in there somewhere. Or auto-generate tags, not understanding tagging either, but fair enough. So while I was listening to the Boss team, I started this thing using CSS grids for layout, a bit of styling, and like 40 lines of PHP to actually show that you can now use Boss to actually find keywords for a certain topic. So you put a keyword in, you pick your language, which showed the multi-language support of Boss as well, which was something that not many other people do. And then it gives you the first 20 results of Yahoo and gives you the keywords of these 20 results and actually lists them how often they were used. So you don't have any duplicates. You just have a block of 10 keywords, which are real keywords that people enter to find these websites for copy and paste. I've been asked several times if people can use that professionally. I don't know how more professionally you could use it, but it's actually quite successful and showed people what Boss can do that other APIs didn't do. This is GeoMaker. When Placemaker came out, Yahoo Placemaker, it's basically an API where I can send a text, a URL, or a RSS feed to, and it finds the geolocations in this text and gives it back to me as lat long, where an Earth ID, and hierarchy. So basically, I can turn any text into a map or into something that I can find on my mobile phone. And this is something not any other company offers. It's one of our coolest APIs out there, but most people, I guess, if we walk around the office, like, what is Placemaker? I don't know, it's like PlaceDex or something, I don't know. So the problem with Placemaker was it's an API that uses post, which is not a hardcore thing to do, but a lot of people got confused because I can't send a link to you and say, like, click on this link and this is what Placemaker does. Or copy this link in your product and this is what Placemaker does. So I built this GeoMaker interface, again with YUI for the layout, where I said, like, enter URL, your text, or your RSS feed, click it. In the second step, you get a table with all the locations that were found. You can uncheck the ones that you don't want to have, because sometimes you find links like Europe, America, which is not quite useful to put on the map. And in the third step here, you get a map for copy and pasting, and you get the microformats in the text for copy and pasting. And there's also an API if you want to do that on a programmatic level. That made TechCrunch. Placemaker didn't, because it solves a problem. It solves an issue that people had. Like, okay, this is what I can do with this, cool. I don't want to read the documentation. I don't know what you mean by post, REST, API, these kind of things. But I can now generate a map of my website and copy and paste it back into my website. That's great. So I had the Telegraph, the UK newspaper, come up to me the day after and email me, can you come in? We want to use that in our content management system. And we're talking with them right now. And without this interface, without this, like, this is how easy as it is, they wouldn't have heard about that. Tweet locations was another thing where I showed Placemaker, which basically does a search on Twitter for a certain person that you type in, like YDN here, and analyzes all the tweets that they've done in the last few minutes and shows the geolocation on a map. This is not that useful, but basically what I did with this, I showed what Placemaker can do with something that people were very excited about at that moment, which was Twitter, because they just released the Firehose API and allowed people to do some new cool things with Twitter. So I said, like, okay, Twitter, geolocation, let's put it together. We've got the systems here. Play with it. And this is what a big thing we should encourage people. Play with our stuff. Don't read our documentation and use it perfectly and professionally. Have fun exploring our things and do cool things with it. So Guhubi, a friend of mine does research for university right now, and she was very annoyed that the results of Google, Yahoo, and Bing are completely different. It had like 20 tabs open. It was really confusing for her. So I built this interface in YQL, and there is a live screencast available, how I built this from scratch in 30 minutes with YQL and the systems that we have. And I'm not an amazing developer. I'm just somebody who uses things that we produce. So this one now shows you Google, Yahoo, and Bing results next to each other, and you can click the links and preview the page on the bottom. And this is for researching. Absolutely brilliant, because you don't have to go back in the browser, another window, another tab. You have all in one interface. You note it down next to you, or you copy and paste it into Word, and you're done. And this is something that also show yourself next to the competition. Don't be afraid of it. The competition does something cool. Praise that. We should be a tech voice that says, like, here's cool technical stuff happening. Not like, oh, we only release cool technical stuff. Another great example is the YUI Grids Builder by David Glass, which was a Hack Day project, I think. And the YUI grids are great for laying out websites that work across browsers, all the browsers that we support. And there's good documentation for it. It's not that hard to understand. But again, I got lots and lots of people complaining, like, I don't want to learn all these class names. I don't want to understand the HTML to put in. I can do that better myself. Have fun, do it better yourself. But if you want to use YUI grids, you can also use this grids builder here that allows you to click together your layout in an interactive manner here, which is also built with YUI. So while you're using something in a more easy fashion than you did before, you also see that you can build an application like that using YUI. So through the backdoor, we're basically telling people this is actually what you can do with YUI as well. Then you copy and paste it over, and you've got your HTML. You copy and paste it into an editor, you save it, and you can start typing in your text, and the layout will be working. It also shows you that we offer the CSS hosted for you, and that also points to, like, okay, the rest of YUI can be available from that as well. So we could have written like treatises and books about this, but we don't need to, because this is interactive and you play with it and it explains itself. And this is good. Interfaces can explain themselves. Code cannot explain itself unless you expect everybody to be the same. The other thing that YUI has that other libraries don't is that it's very atomic and granular. It's like you have one thing that does one thing and another thing that does another thing. We don't have one big monolithic library that does everything in one block of code, which is great. I love that, because that's how I develop. One script should do one thing and nothing else, because then if that breaks, I know where to fix it. I know where the problem was. Problem was that people basically, if I want to use more, which ones do I have to include? What do I have to do? And that's why we built this configurator as well. You just click together what you want, and it gives you the URL at the end that you just copy and paste in, and the configurator knows which one of these things are dependent on each other. So if I have a slider, it already highlights the drag and drop with me. For me, it highlights the CSS for me. All these things are available for you. And we offer also our hosting and Google's hosting up there. So once again, if you don't like our hosting, use Google's. That gives a message that we show we don't care who actually hosts our stuff, because it's open source anyways, but it should be fastest for you. So if our CDN is slow in your environment, Google's is fast, here you go, click that button, and you don't even have to go to Google and understand where they store their stuff. YQL is another great example. YQL is basically, to me, the coolest thing we've done in years. And it revolutionized the way I approach web development. It revolutionized the way I advocate APIs, because you don't want to go through 5 APIs if you want to use them on a product. It's like I use some, we had this internally when I used on Answers. We want to use Flickr photos. We want to use Geo. We wanted to use, what else? Doesn't really matter. Some other department stuff as well. So who's responsible for the API? Where's the documentation? What goes into the API? What comes out of the API? How do I have to authenticate? And that was like 2 weeks of meetings gone already that we could have used for developing. And with YQL, you don't have to do that anymore. Every API is a data table that I can click on. I get a description in the console, what the thing needs, what it puts out, and I can filter and match and mix any of these APIs in this little interface. And it's not only our stuff, but it's the web. It's everybody out there. Google stuff is in there. Microsoft stuff is in there. And this is just a great way of telling people, play with APIs, play with data. Don't read the documentation. Learn about authentication before you're allowed to get to the first data. Here you have the data immediately, and you can play with it. So bring the data out as open, into the open as soon as possible. This is what people use an API for. They don't use an API to make your cool calls and type in URLs. They use your API to get data back. They want to have the connections. They want to have the photos. They want to have the events in their area. They want to have their bookmarks. This is the information that they want. They don't want to get stuck about like reading how to get there. Flickr is another great example. The Flickr API is not easy to use. It is actually quite hard to use because you have to authenticate for everything. Even things that don't need authentication sometimes need you to authenticate yourself to get there. But what they've done is they've got the app garden, and they got this method called Navigator here. So every one of these APIs, I can type in something here, get the data back. And Flickr authenticates itself for me here. So I don't have to go through the authentication process before I get to that data. So I can do a try before you buy of the API before I use it in my own scripts. And this is basically very, very important, because if somebody goes to this site, if somebody says like, okay, Flickr collections get info, I type this in Google, I end up on this website. If I couldn't do anything here, I would think it's broken. If I see this and I can start typing in cat and get photos back from cat, then I will start reading the rest of the documentation, how I can do it in my own script. But if I don't get that information up front, I would be wary, like, okay, authentication, I don't want to do that. So keep the eye on the end result and explain the way to get there. So in this case, it's we have to start with like, what is the use case? What is the most important use case of something? And then how to get there. So this is where I start getting annoying about some of our examples. This is YQL calls with PHP. I'm using PHP for all my stuff. I'm using YQL for all my stuff. This is if I entered YQL calls, YQL PHP in Google, this is what comes back. And what it tells me to do is like, I now have to do a PHP call. This is YQL basic PHP. I have to download the My Social application. I have to read the 2-minute tutorial, and then I have to put this code in, which means include once, yosdk, lib, Yahoo Inc. Where is this? This is somewhere in the download, so I have to download that, unzip it to my hard drive, put it into my server, and then probably change that URL as well to get the include of the SDK. Then I have to define an API key and a shared secret, and I have your consumer key goes here, your shared secret goes here. Where do they come from? That's part of another documentation piece further up or on another page where I have to authenticate myself to get this data. And then it says querying public data. And then it says like for public data, you don't need authentication. So why do you just tell me to download an SDK and get a shared secret and a consumer key if there's public data that I can get as well? So the next thing then I do a 2-legged application API, a Yahoo application, and I do 2 Flickr query and a newsfeed query, and then I get a Flickr response and a news response, which is good. This expects me to download the SDK, get an authentication code, authenticate, and then get some data. The data, however, doesn't need any authentication. This is Flickr photo search, which is open in YQL. This is an RSS feed, which is open in a browser. It's not even, I don't even need YQL to get to that data. So why did I just download that SDK? Why did I have to go and make the SDK work and probably my server isn't set up to support everything that the SDK needs, so I get stuck even before I get to the first point of data. So it's a common error. We pack too much information into an example. It makes complete sense to do authentication with YQL before you get to the data, because you want to have everything. You need authenticated data. It makes sense to do that. Not in the first example, and not when the headline says this is public data. So if I talk about public data and I talk about authentication in the same instance, that confuses the hell out of people. This is how I explain PHP and YQL. Here's your YQL call that you can copy and paste out of the console. This is the API endpoint. This is 5 lines of curl. JSON decode your data, and you have it as a PHP object, and you can put it in your page. If you don't know PHP, if you're one of these web developers that thinks that JavaScript, HTML, and CSS is everything you ever need, use JavaScript. Same example. The YQL statement, assemble a URL, create a script node, put it in the head of the document, call a function back, get your data back with YQL. This is something I can put in a tweet if I shorten that down. And this is how we should get out there and tell people this is what YQL is, this is what our boss API is, this is what the APIs that we offer. Because then they're like, whoa, I get this data, so how can I get private data? Next step. Explain the way to the data, don't try to get it all done in one step. So, anticipate stumbling blocks and write the story to the full results. Where do people get stuck? As I said, the first will be, where's the SDK? Where do I put the SDK? What do I do with that? Does my server really support all of that? Why is there an error message? What is an OAuth authentication? What is two-legged? I didn't talk about people here. I thought it was code. And anticipate where people get stuck. And when you're developing the product, you cannot do this because you're already too close to it. You know all this stuff. And that's why you think you don't need to have to explain it anymore. So here's how to get public data. That few lines of code is like, this is how to get YQL foot in the door. Here's how to get private data. If you want to get private data, if you want to have your friends on Yahoo, this needs authentication. Here's the SDK. Here's how you use it. Here's a link to click on where you can see it in action with yourself authenticated. And that's how people get our data. That's how people love it. And then here's how to use the return information is another thing. Like, just like a var dump of all the information is great, but here's how you can make it look pretty. Here's how you can make it easily understandable in HTML. Here you can turn it into a Flash movie, whatever. This is one of my favorites that we have. This is our static maps API. So if I want to have a map and I'm on a mobile phone or I'm on an environment that is slow and I don't want an HX map, I don't know if JavaScript will be available, I want to have an image map. Basically a photo of one of our maps, satellite photo, street photo, whatever it is. Our API means you have to send a URL through and you get XML back with the map data in there, and the only thing that it returns is a result element with the URL for the image in there. So I have to do a call, I have to disassemble this XML, put the URL out and put it inside an image tag to show that thing. This is the PHP code that we have. Everything that annoys me about static map APIs is that your map key is always available, publicly visible. So this is something an API like that could work around. So this could be an authentication rather than the real URL, and then I don't have to show my map key. But I still show my map key in here. Then we have a response file get contents. If it fails, blah, 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 image source, image, show the display image. Our competitor, this is the URL that you put in an image tag and you have a map. So you say mapsgoogle.com, static API, sensor is false. This is something they just did for mobile phones, which is badly actually described in their documentation. I don't know what the hell they're on about there. You define a size, you define the map type, you set markers. I want the blue marker with the label L at this location, and the key is my map key that I have to copy and paste in. If I want 5 markers in there, I just put another markers equals, another markers equals. It automatically finds the right zoom level. It automatically finds the right map location, that all of these markers are possible and show. And this is great. They have much more money. They have a bigger team. They actually put more dedication into it. But they probably did user testing with this as well. Developers are users. So if we release something to them, release something that makes sense. And if that is too hard to understand, They even created a little wizard thing for it. So you customize your map. You start typing in the locations that you want to have. You put the marker in there. You can draw a polyline. You then say what the marker size and color should be like, what the path should be like in colors, what the size of the map should be, and you get a copy and paste of the whole map. They did this a year after I did Placemaker, so I'm like, yes. But still, it's like, this is the way to do it. And this is not because they're better than us. That's just because they put more effort into it, or they're more dedicated to the cause, or I don't know what's going on there. But it makes sense. The next thing is know your environment. Our code example here from the static map API uses file get contents for a request pointing to our server. Every server that I own that is not a local host has file get contents turned off. Because every PHP backdoor, every PHP security attack uses file get contents to load data from another server. So our code example, I copy and paste it into my server, it will not work. And this is what the Lego thing down there shows. We try to get a 3 thing onto 4 dots. This is the example what I've done for Placemaker, for GeoMaker. If you want to use GeoMaker yourself, you actually get the code from GitHub, you put it, you unzip it into your server. This file is called test.php. In the README, the first thing is like click this test.php and see what works out. So here I try to do things. I say like if there was a post coming back, I say it worked. I test if it's not my server. Then I give a heading out, say testing. I try to post some data back to the page, and I try to render that out. I try to do some XML stuff. And all of this actually will throw an error or will tell you what's going on. This is everything I use in GeoMaker in like these 10 lines. And people can put this on there, click the test, then they know when they start GeoMaker and it breaks, they know what the problem is. Because in GeoMaker itself, I don't throw out any errors because of security and whatever. But this is the kind of stuff that we should do, like make people, give them test scripts, give them build scripts. This starts internally as well. When I started here as a web developer, I thought I use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The first week, I actually built my own dev box in Unix with like several wiki pages to make that work, rather than like, here's a script to do that. So write defensive code in your environment. Like, don't expect anything to work. Say like, if this returns something, then do something. Not like do something, and then there's an error in there. Because if your SDKs, if our demo code fails, people will not go further. They're like, okay, this doesn't work. I go to the competition. They have something similar, not as good, but yeah, their stuff works. Check the online status. The amount of times I basically I try to pull things from the web, and the people installing my stuff are actually offline. It's quite interesting as well. You're like, okay, you're off. Have a message. You're offline. You have to be online for doing that. And YQL does that, for example. In YQL, if I click on a table in the console that needs HTTPS, it actually tells me this one needs HTTPS, please switch to that interface, rather than like, no data back. Okay, that API is broken. List dependencies very early. Like this SDK expects PHP 5 on an Apache with that kind of extensions running. The extensions are available here. PHP 5 can be updated here. Apache is available here. So people know where to find the stuff, not expect them to know where they are, because we have them in our repository, but other people don't. Provide a build and test script. Like if there is an environment to be built, make it a script. I mean, the other day I saw something that was so totally cool, which is a Linux distribution testing thing. That it is a script like 40 lines that you put on your server, and you give it your authentication to S3, and it actually goes to S3 of Amazon, fires up a virtual machine for you, gets the Linux image from another distribution, starts it in that virtual machine, and does the other stuff that you want to do with it as well. So you don't need to, the normal thing would be saying like, get the Linux image there, put it up on S3, point your S3 instance to that. It's like, you can do that with a script. Why not? This is what we do for our day-to-day job anyways. Provide a demo key is another big thing. People don't want to sign up for a key just to try out your API for the first time. Yahoo Demo for maps was a great thing, and everybody does that. I mean, our Bing table in YQL only works because they had the Bing team had left one of their keys in one of their documentations, and we're using that one. Doesn't matter, it's not limited anyways. So make it easy to use our code. Provide a live demo, show a screencast. What does this code do? Not like, oh, download the code and make it work. And we don't know if you're going to make it work or not, I don't care. Here's what it does, here's the source code. This sells it. If it's behind authentication, if it's behind a firewall, if it's an internal system that nobody can install in 5 minutes, make a screencast. Screencasts, I show you on Mac, costs $5. You right-click it, you start recording your screen, you save it as a video, you upload it to YouTube. People know what you can do with our stuff, rather than like hoping to find it out themselves. Provide a full download. GitHub is the best for that because it makes it available for you. You can read the code, you can get it zipped up, and you can easily maintain it. Problem is, if we have a zip somewhere on our server, it will probably get outdated. If you generate the zip from live code, once you submit it, you basically will always have an up-to-date thing. Make sure it works before you put it on GitHub, though, because our social SDK was broken for a week, some weeks ago, but we fixed it. Offer hosting if needed. My server doesn't have PHP 5. Okay, here's a partner that has free servers or cheap servers, and you can actually put your stuff there. Here's a sandbox. With virtualization nowadays, I can fire up a virtual machine for somebody for half an hour, and say like, here's a button, here's your server, the file is already up there, play with it. The server will be offline in half an hour, or you can sign up for the hosting and get it for the rest of your life. Not a problem nowadays. Document full download and link back to a live example. So the full download should have a documentation in there as well, because people will basically find that zip file a week later on their hard drive and wonder what it is. And a README file in there actually helps them a lot. And link back to a live example if you still wonder what that was, it's available here. So write excellent copy and paste code. This is one of my biggest bugbears. Basically because developers are lazy. They're not going to download the thing. They go to the page. Oh, PHP example, great. Copy and paste the code, put it in there somewhere. Great, I know that I now use YQL with PHP. If our code examples are bad quality code, this will be replicated all over the world, and people think that's how we develop. The questions that we ask people in interviews when we hire them, we should reflect them in our demo code. The best quality that we expect when we hire people should be what we show to the outside world. Link all your resources in copy and paste code. As I said, with the YOSDK, for example, here, /YOSDK, I might have unpacked the thing into another folder. So I cannot point to that SDK. Why is another HTTP link pointing to somewhere out on the web? Then we will know that the people have the SDK as soon as they copy and paste that PHP script in somewhere. Provide the full script up front. That's one thing that bit me with my first JavaScript book. I've basically, in every chapter, I said at the beginning, all the code of the book is available at beginningjavascript.com. Do not type in anything here. Just download the code and code along with me when you want to read the book. And then I just basically explained a long script and cut it up into little bits and explained the bits part by part. And people, the first 50 emails were like, I typed in those 10 lines of JavaScript and they don't work. You're like, well, you didn't need to type them in. You can see them live here on the server. Yeah, but your book is terrible because it actually doesn't work. The code in there doesn't work. I had Amazon comments where people basically just took some code out of the middle of a script, tried to make that work, and it didn't work for them. So show the full script up front. Here's what it does. Here's the full script, and now we're explaining part by part what's going on. You're telling a story. You give the solution, and then you give the little chapters what you mean by each of them. So much for singing. Validate and secure your code. Our code example should not have XSS in there. Our code example should not allow you to actually put some SQL injection in there. And we have these things where basically, oh, $get something, just echo it out, fair enough. Filter it. Say like, okay, here's a filter, and the first line is like, yeah, do never use any information from the web without filtering it. Here's a link to the PHP filter controls. Here's a link to the Yahoo security section on YDN. Have this, because people will use our demo code, get their servers hacked, and say like, hey, that came from Yahoo. Secure validation as well, same thing. Use best practices. What we preach, we should also show people. So this is another example that I saw, and this is, as I said, this makes me as angry as these kittens down there, because this is a JavaScript code that basically renders out a list of results with city, county, country, latitude, and longitude. And it's a layout table, which I haven't used since 1999, and it should not be used anymore. And it uses B tags, which are not valid HTML nowadays either anymore. And above all, the layout of the thing, that's not readable. I don't know, what are all these backslashes? What is going on there? I don't have any idea what's going on there. So if you don't want to write HTML, then don't write HTML and say like, hey, I've got a list of things coming out. Can you give me the HTML for that? Yeah, here you go. That's 2 seconds on Messenger to any front-end developer or anything. But this code now goes out and people say, yeah, great, I can use tables for layout because Yahoo uses them, right? And Yahoo are great, so they know how to do it. And this is just lazy. This is not bad. This is not bad intent. This is just lazy. We just lay out something with a table. And this is not what we do anymore. Bonus tricks for the whole thing. Show how your code plays well with others, successful products. As I said, with the tweet locations, people were very crazy about Twitter. And I'm like, hey, Twitter doesn't have geolocation yet. It will have in the next month. They just announced that. But you can now use Placemaker to geolocate your tweets. Whoa, cool. I can use Twitter and this other thing, whoa, I can use that for something else as well. Get your foot in the door by siding with people that people want to use their stuff off. Give examples how using your product made others successful. Like Nestoria, like all these stories we have from hack days. How did people save time and money using our products? Where is our products used in the wild? The YUI does a great job with that on the blog. But with the YUI in the wild, that every few weeks you see who uses YUI for their products and how much faster were they able to build something because they used it. This is exactly what we need to do, because we can tell the story, we can say we're successful because we use our products, but if somebody else says they're successful because they use our products, that's a much, much better story to tell. Advocate maintainable and reusable code with our examples. So if the code is 5 lines longer, then it could be, but it actually explains people how to make secure PHP, or it has an HTML structure that makes sense, or it actually is a fail-safe code that tries something and then prints it out rather than just printing it out. That's a great story, because then in interviews, we don't have to ask people, where did you learn this? Because they might say, I learned it from your demo code. I had a guy that I hired in London. We sent people a code exercise. And he came back, and in the code exercise, one of the things was validating an email in JavaScript. And he had copied and pasted one of the functions on my book. He didn't know that I was the guy that's going to interview him on JavaScript, so he was very white when I got into the room. And I asked him, like, okay, so the JavaScript validation code, that's interesting. It's like, I got this out of a book. And I'm like, yeah, my book. And he's like, yeah, okay. Show me what you've done there. Explain me what every line does, and then tell me how you could make this code better. He knew every part of the code. He knew how to improve it a bit. I hired him. There's no problem with lazy developers. If they understand things that they use, that's not a problem whatsoever. If they try to reinvent it because their ego tells them to, that's actually a problem. But if we find our demo code somewhere else in use and people actually teach people good practices from our demo code, then we've really, really won. And this is really what we should do. So spend more time on our demo code rather than just getting it out there. It should be the cleanest and best code you ever write in your career. Because you will be judged by it, the company will be judged by it, and people's products will be insecure because your demo code is in there that is insecure if it's bad code. So anything you do in the sample code will be used and imitated. And the imitation is quite fun, how far that goes. I mean, the amount of bad practices in HTML that several other companies have done in the past, that became almost a meme on mailing lists. Like, yeah, it's okay to use table layouts because Google does it in Google Reader. It's great to use table layouts because Microsoft has it in their header. So why should Microsoft is better than me, right? No, there's so many more things that go into a big product, and you don't have any excuse if you write a blog to use these outdated technologies. So if we do a good job, you can help teach great developers of tomorrow just with sample code. Like, well, great, yeah, okay, they filter a get variable before they render it out. Maybe it's a good idea to do that with all my code. If you do a bad job, you cause truisms, bad coding practices, and fail at advocating yourself and your company as thought leaders. Because we will be judged by what people use. And as I said, people don't go through the documentation from top to bottom. They do a Google search, they find a part of the page or one of the documentation pages, see the code example there. Even if we had said before, like, here's a filtering mechanism that we used before, still point to that. Make people aware that there is a whole context in the whole thing. The main trick is to create documentation is examples is collaboration. You are not the developer that writes the documentation if you've built it. Somebody else should do it. Somebody should sit next to you and say, like, what have you done there? Okay, I understand that, I understand that. Why did you do this? Okay, because of that reason. So, okay, that's something we need to document. There is a reason for a certain way of writing code, and we should tell people why we do it that way. So work with someone to ask you the right question, challenge you to create a rock-solid demo. This is why tech editing, this is why books are great for IT, and we always think like, oh, great, I mean, this guy's written 5 books, he must know his stuff. Yeah, probably he does, but he also had a good tech editor that told him, like, please explain that easier. I've been tech editing 3 books lately, and it's just great to see how you can communicate with the author and get the thing so much better in the end because you asked the right question. So what if that happens? Did you put a fail-safe test in there? Like, what if I'm offline and I put this thing in? Okay, let's put a check in there that one works out. It was terribly cute with the there's scripting for it with Ajax, the book that I just did, the tech editing. It's a JavaScript book for designers, which sounds like quite a challenge, but he managed to pull it off. And I was chatting with him. Basically, I sent him emails about the chapter. This could be changed, this could be changed, this could be changed. And he would immediately call me on Skype and say, like, let's talk about this. And this is very good. So sending an email back, like, what do you think my code is wrong? That would then start arguing rather than, like, have a communication about it. He called me on Skype. We chatted with each other. I told him that this is the problem. This is how I should fix it. He went over to the other computer, fixed the code, and his kid was chatting with me by doing that and showed me their puppy and all kind of things. And I was like, this is so cool to have a tech relationship with a writer like this. And this is why the book is great. And this is all I wanted to talk about. So thank you very much. And any questions?